How Working in Accessibility Changed My Life, a presentation from Accessibrand, a collective of design and marketing professionals whose lives have been impacted by disability. The theme for 2021 IDPD is Leadership and Participation of Persons with Disabilities Towards an Inclusive, Accessible, and Sustainable Post-COVID-19 World. Therefore, we want to share with you how the accessibility concept could change our lives and why we believe that is a key to having a more inclusive world.
My name is Jolene. I am the founder of Accessibrand, and Accessibrand is an accessibility-focused design and marketing agency that offers flexible employment for people impacted by disability. I am a mom to 3 kids. They are 10, 12, and 20. We have a few animals floating around the house. I'm also a wife of 15 years, and I have been a graphic designer for 23 years. How I am impacted by disability is my youngest daughter, Joy, who's 10, has a rare form of dwarfism. I was diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos a few years ago, which is a connective tissue disorder. And my 2 other children also have some medical complications. So our life revolves around advocacy and disability.
Thank you. And for the next step, what brought you to this specific career now to doing accessibility stuff?
Yeah, I think the biggest reason I have been impacted and started working in accessibility was because of my daughter, Joy. So she's 10, and when she started school, I started having to advocate for her through the school board and for her needs and requirements. But as a designer, and I owned another agency prior, I realized how inaccessible marketing and design can be. So digital accessibility has a lot of holes and a lot of problems in it. And I really wanted to be able to educate. I think obviously being impacted by disability completely changed my life. First with my daughter being born and having so many medical requirements and appointments and needing to juggle my career and flexibility and things like that for her needs. But then I was, becoming very sick myself. I wasn't well. And I think, trying to balance those things out was really difficult. And so I needed to find options that worked for me and my family and for my health. And that's essentially how I came to this crossroads and didn't know what I could do for a career. So I thought, how can I change my career to integrate accessibility? So segueing into how Accessibrand came to be, Accessibrand was really trying to create an agency or a company that benefited people with disabilities, whether it was themselves or families that had been impacted by disability, as well as trying to change how people view design and marketing. A lot of people don't understand. They think that they can just use software and it's just about websites. But essentially, Accessibrand takes it to the next level. So rather than, do things the way we typically have and fix them later, which is what most companies are still doing, is fixing it later, is that we're retraining everybody in our team and even our clients is to think differently from the beginning. So when we start with any type of brand, which is what Accessibrand means, is accessible branding, is that we can essentially bake in accessibility right from the beginning. So we're creating inclusive and flexible environments for our team, but we're also creating inclusive and accessible brands for our clients through design and marketing, positive portrayal of people in imagery. We're teaching best practices in design and marketing to support internal teams. We're also teaching plain language training. We are also doing audits. So several of our teammates have disabilities and they use assistive technology. So we are hiring them to actually do live audits. So we call them user journeys. And therefore, it takes the place of where software is not meeting the mark. So we're also providing those services. But essentially, we're creating ourselves as a one-stop shop for all digital accessibility with design and marketing. So it's a powerful statement to think about how accessibility can change the world. I think universal design, inclusive design are really the keys. But if we start with accessibility, it's not just for people with disabilities, it's for people with English as a second language, it's for the senior population, it's for all different types of communities. And the more we can change our thinking to understand how digital accessibility works, the more we can provide equal access to all communications materials, and even beyond that for everybody. So within our team, we don't look at disabilities as something as, like a deficit. We look at it as a superpower, because how do you know it's going to work unless you ask people that have lived experience? So you should be capitalizing on the fact that we have that lived experience. And unfortunately, historically, people with disabilities are asked to volunteer their time and they're not compensated. We want to create a different model, and we want to help advocate and educate the world at some point so people understand, that you shouldn't be judged based on your lack of ability in one area. It's everybody can do what they need to do. They just need to do it differently. So I think being able to educate people on accessibility and show them how it makes a difference in people's lives will hopefully make everything inclusive. I mean, we know we wouldn't build a building without a wheelchair access. Why are we building websites or other types of materials knowing that we're leaving out an entire population? If you were to look at it that way, nobody would not include accessibility as part of their plan. I think the last year of my life has been extremely exciting. We relaunched Accessibrand in September of 2020 after being part of the Conestoga College Venture Lab, and we just completed the Access to Success Accelerator, which is Canada's first disability-focused accelerator, and it was just, the whole last year has been amazing. We've been part of How She Hustles. We've won a couple awards. We won a pitch day. It's just, the whole last year has just been a whirlwind and so exciting. But for me, what makes it so important, and I get goosebumps thinking about it, is that when my daughter grows up, that she is not judged based on being a little person. And if that helps her, then I know it's going to help other people. And that's most exciting for me, is that to know that we can help change people's perspectives and mindsets so that everybody has a fair and equal access to everything, job opportunities, paying bills, going to the supermarket, using a credit card. All of this comes down to changing people's perspectives and, their thought process. So that's really what's most exciting for me. I think that's the best way to answer it. I think what I want to say the most for a day that's so important is that I was once that person who didn't understand disability. And I would hope that everyone would take the time to learn about it, because at any point in our lives, we can be impacted by disability, whether it's temporary or if it's long-term. Could be a car accident, you become a senior. I think it's so important for people just to think differently and to, try and understand it from another perspective. I think that is probably the biggest takeaway that I would like for people to understand. And, we're trying to build that team to help change people's perspectives. And we hope through the education and working with our team that it'll grow to something much larger, and it'll carry on into other businesses and, create a fair and equitable world.
Working in accessibility has changed my life with all the connections I have had the opportunity to make. Where the community only wants to see others help remove barriers for those that face these barriers where possible. I have found courses that I am able to complete and gain certificates for that are made easy enough for those with cognitive disabilities like myself to succeed in completing. I quote that I've seen in my learning journey, and I don't believe there is a more accurate statement. If you are designing with accessibility in mind, then you are designing for everyone. Beck Westcott, Accessibility Specialist and Designer.
Well, I can start at the beginning of my journey, if you will. In 1987, I believe, I was diagnosed with an eye condition called retinitis pigmentosa. And basically what that is that the retina in the eye, those cells degenerate over time. And depending on the type of RP that one person has, it can be a very quick process, or in my case, it can take many, many years, which it has. But at this time now, these many years later, my vision has deteriorated to about the point of being almost totally blind. I took some courses in relation to computers at that time, shortly after, through the CNIB and George Brown College, and that's where I got my computer experience. I then went on into the financial industry, and I worked there for about a decade, with my last position being an auditor of computer systems for a large financial institution. So I was auditing computer centers in North America and overseas as well. After being in that industry, I semi-retired, if you will, and since moving to Kitchener, I became involved with the Grand River Accessibility Committee, and that really kind of fostered my involvement in the accessibility movement. Prior to that, when I was, just as I was diagnosed, I was living in a town called Georgetown, and I got involved with Physically Handicapped Citizens Association. That was run by a lady there, and they had a vast library of, she had a vast library of information on disabilities of all sorts. And that gave me a good introduction to the world of accessibility at that time. But fast forwarding to now to Kitchener, I was involved with the Grand River Accessibility Advisory Committee, and that gave me further insight into the issues surrounding accessibility, specifically in relation to the AODA. So that's kind of my background there. Through my involvement with the Grand River Accessibility Advisory Committee, many times participants that would come to ask for our advice, those participants were dealing with computer systems, their websites, and talking about the accessibility. And that was something that I was starting to feel was going to be a big issue for me as my eyesight was diminishing to the point where I no longer was comfortable using screen magnification software. My eyes just wouldn't handle it anymore. So I knew that I would be venturing into the world of screen reading technology, which provides the interface between the web itself and the user, myself, using audio of that website. So that became a big interest of me, and I wanted to ensure, as these people came in and described their website, my first question is it accessible, and how do you know? And in many instances, they really didn't know. And I would then go home and test that site and bring them back my conclusions of how accessible it was, just as a user, not in terms of the WCAG standards or anything of that nature. They were just starting to come out around then. So the standards were, basically the W3G was in its infancy at that time. So that's really what piqued my interest. And of course, as I became more dependent on the screen reading software, that interest only increased. Well, I agree with your point there that the nomenclature has changed, and the focus has changed from the disabled person to their environment, whether that be a physical environment or, in my case, the virtual environment. That environment has to become accessible to all people. And I think what has happened is that the drive for accessibility has reached the mainstream in a way that they see that making things more accessible for people that have disabilities, whatever those disabilities might be, in effect, makes it more accessible for everyone. So if you do curb cuts, that helps people in wheelchairs, but it also helps mothers with strollers. It helps people that are elderly to manage instead of having to step off a large curb onto the sidewalk. And I know this from experience, just that little drop, if you land incorrectly, you're going to turn your ankle and there you go. You've fallen under the road and you may have broken your ankle or hurt it badly. So again, with universal design, for example, this whole concept of universality of design, again, not only does it help people that have disabilities, but it helps the mainstream population. So if you have, instead of a doorknob, you have a lever system to open and close doors, that assists people that have issues with arm mobility, etc., or somebody who has a problem with their hands, that they can't grasp and turn that knob. So the lever system is much more functional. So this whole thing has evolved and is evolving. And I think my role in that has only increased as well in terms of my willingness or my interest in keeping up to date on what is going on in the accessibility field as it relates to myself and as it relates to others.
In my opinion, the concept of accessibility will allow for more essential services to be usable by more and more people in general, along with people with disabilities. Regarding websites, if more of them were designed around accessibility from the start, more people with disabilities would be able to use their services or simply access their information easier. Making necessary services and websites in general more accessible from the beginning, rather than having it tacked on after the fact, would make everything better for everyone, not just people with disabilities. Sebastian GEMIN, Social Media Manager.
The future is bright in many ways, but it's the progress that it seems slow, and it's almost like a 2 steps forward, 1 step back in some instances. So that can be disheartening, but it's the struggle. And you as a person with a disability, I'm always striving towards that goal, and the education is part of it, just in your everyday experiences, and sometimes you get a little tired of educating people about the same thing over and over again, but you can't expect people that aren't directly affected to be knowledgeable in that regard. So it's up to us in many ways to educate those around us of the necessity for accessibility and how it will help them. And many people do not discover this world until they themselves are affected. And generally it's in a short-term situation where they've broken an arm or broken a limb. And then they're forced to realize, geez, I need accommodations to even use the bathroom, to have a shower. And so those things kind of hit home. So hopefully they can carry that short term into a bit more long-term thinking and empathy when they see people that have a disability in and around them. So, this whole idea of accessibility, as I mentioned before with universal design, it's all going towards that end goal. And now you have things that like I like to call Star Trek, with things like the Alexa and Google and the Apple devices that are in people's homes. That is, for me, a great accessibility tool, because I can do so many things now with my voice that I don't have to have access to my computer right away. I can do simple things like ask the time or set a timer for when I'm cooking in the kitchen, or have a reminder set to turn something off. And I can see the value of that for people as they grow old, where you're having a hard time remembering things. You can create lists on these devices. So I think the world is going to become more accessible. I mean, look at self-driving cars, for example. For somebody like myself, if I could jump into a self-driving car with assurance that it's going to be relatively safe, then that frees up my mobility quite dramatically. I can now go places that I have to rely on others to do now, or use public transit, which in itself can be difficult for people that have disabilities. So I think the world is going towards that end goal. It's a struggle, and we always have to be on top of it and remind the powers that be that this is an important and essential issue, and not only just in day-to-day activities, but even in things like gaining employment. There's such a reserve of people that have disabilities that are not employed, and they have a huge pool of talent that business is not accessing right now. And I think that is a shame, and it's detrimental to our overall economy and well-being. So I think the future is looking better and better. As I mentioned earlier, my sister and I both share this eye disease, and she was 10 years older than I was. So she was 10 years into it before I was even diagnosed. So I've kind of followed her in many ways, and we commiserated extensively with one another about the issues that surrounded us day to day and societal, but a lot more on the day-to-day issues of how this particular disease impacts your life. But I remember one year I had gone out to Calgary to visit her around Christmas time. And that's why this story comes to mind, because it's getting close to Christmas now. And my eyesight was considerably better then. I didn't require a cane. Kathleen was using a cane. But it's funny with this disease, whatever eyesight you have, you think you have all of it. And you forget that you are visually impaired and you're not seeing what you're not seeing. So it sometimes goes out of mind. And we were coming into the house, and we just picked up a bunch of Christmas pies. I think they were apple pies from her sister-in-law. And there was probably about 7 or 8 of them in this box that I was carrying. And I had reached the house first. And I'd gone in through the door, and when you come in through the door, there's a platform, and then there's stairs going down, and then there were stairs going up to the kitchen. And of course, I was in my winter gear. And so what I had done is I just reached up. There was only 3 stairs up to the kitchen floor, the 3 stairs up, put the box of pies down. And it was an open box. The pies were open. And I put the box down, and I started to remove my shoes, or my boots. My sister came in right behind me, and she kicks her boots off quickly, and then trumps up the 3 stairs, and splash, she steps right into the pies. Well, she was freaking out. She was like, "Oh my God." And I just started to howl, because I thought, I'll just put these things here real quick. I'll have my boots off, and then I'll pick them up, take them up, and put them into the kitchen. And of course, well, when we ate the pie, because it was delicious, but it did have a nice heel mark in them. One of the things that I think was really valuable for me was seeing other people that have different disabilities than myself. It's very easy to get wrapped up in your own problems because you're faced with them every day, from the moment you open your eyes to the moment that you close them. But when you experience through other people their day-to-day lives and the issues that they have to face, I think that helps you grow as a person through your empathy. You develop more empathy for individuals and what they have to face. And it helps you cope with your own problems. I remember way back, I had gone to a annual general meeting of, I think it was called the Low Vision Association of Ontario at the time. I don't know that the organizations exist at this time, but I had gone into Toronto, and this was just after I was diagnosed. And it was kind of my first experience with a group of low vision people. And I remember looking around the room, and I saw people who had to have monocular tools for their to read. So they would have a monocle in their eye that had a magnification device in it, and they had the paper right up to their face. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, I'm not that bad. I can still read the newspaper. So it kind of gives you a reality check. And one of the speakers, I'd spoken, the gentleman that ran the organization before I'd gone down, and he told me, he said, Andrew, remember, your diagnosis of this eye disease is a horrible thing, but it's not lethal. You will learn to live with it. And those sorts of experiences at the beginning, I think, helped me start on the journey of coping with the disease and learning about disability, and then seeing others and what their journey is like.
Accessibility is synonymous with anti-ableism, and for that matter, anti-capitalism. The more we integrate it into our world, the more equitable our systems can become. If we can deepen our understanding of accessibility as a human rights practice, we can change the world for the better. We can rest and accommodate our own needs and the needs of others, simply giving everyone a chance to exist in this world with no strings attached. The sooner we can prioritize access for disabled people as easily as we do for non-disabled accommodations, the better everyone will be. Accessibility is an act of love and respect so disabled people can not only survive, but thrive. Jessica ODDI, designer and illustrator.
Hello everyone, my name is SADATSHARIFI, and today I want to share some of my lived experience as a person with disability and also my experience regarding my work in accessibility area. I am from Iran, from a city that you might know the name because of the wine, Shiraz. I born and raised there and went to the university to study literature. Then I became a university lecturer there, and soon I figured out that I won't have a tenure track or a permanent job there just because of my limited mobility, which is totally irrelevant to my studies and to the duty of jobs that I was serving. So it was very frustrating, and as a part of coping with that, I came here to Canada to visit my family in Quebec. Luckily, I could have a job offer from McGill University to go there and work there as a visiting scholar and research assistant. There, I found another world in terms of accessibility. Back home in Iran, in my university, which is the second biggest university in Iran, I couldn't use the library because it was not accessible. And also in my all-day life, everyday life, I couldn't find any good accessibility other than some assistive devices. It was not a culture to make things accessible. Nowadays, things changed a lot, but my lived experience there was not very good and fair as a person with limited mobility. Here in Canada, in McGill, I discovered another world. Everything needed to be accessible, and if it was not, I had the right to follow up and make it accessible. It was the start of my learning journey to know about accessibility and its importance and urgence in the Canadian environment. After coming to Ontario and start searching for new jobs as a newcomer and as a job seeker, I figured out that accessibility area is not only a high need area of job, but also it's something that is very meaningful for me to help people having more and better and reliable access to different things, an experience that I didn't have in my home country. I started taking different courses and different sources of study about accessibility in tandem with some real experiences. For example, when I was in McGill, I started making the apartment that I was living, and it was not accessible at all, accessible. I worked closely with the accessibility office of McGill University to prepare everything for a big construction, and they made it accessible for me. And it was a fabulous experience about how I can make changes. In tandem with all of these things, I started studying about diversity, inclusion, and I realized that working in accessibility area can be related to these modern and important concepts too.
I'm continuing to learn about accessibility and how essential it is in everyday settings. I do believe accessibility will change our lives for the better. From my studies, I've found there are many people that suffer from disabilities that are untreated, falling through the cracks of the education system. After starting my learning journey in accessibility, I feel like I'm slowly becoming recognized as a designer. For those who are struggling, never give up because you've got this. Things will change with time. Mike Coles, designer and illustrator.
Nowadays, working about making things more accessible is a part of a bigger picture for me. The picture of not only equality, but also paying attention to different needs of different people, which we called it equity. And I'm really happy and grateful that I can do my job in this area. For going to mention about what is the most interesting experience for me in accessibility, I can tell that the difference that people show when I am talking with them through Zoom or not in person, and they cannot figure out necessarily that I'm a person with disability, and then when we meet in person, what is the difference between their reaction? It's very meaningful for me. And I want to tell something to all of them. I really do appreciate all of you. My family, my friends, and all of the people around me. I can categorize you in two different categories. Persons who love me and support me and respect me in not a conditional approach, unconditional love, support, and respect. And the second category, the second group of people are the people who didn't have this approach. If they had any kind of empathy or respect or support, it was conditional. They wanted me to have big surgeries for the possibility of having a better walking, not only because it's better for my health, but also because they didn't want to deal with a person with disability. I want to say a big thank you to this second group too, because you guys taught me how I shall not be and why accessibility is important about making change in the world instead of focusing on disabilities. At the third point, I want to come to the importance and the power of accessibility concept and how it starts changing world, and hopefully this changing power is continuing. Thinking about accessibility instead of disability is a very, very important and powerful concept, because when you're talking about accessibility, you're talking about what we can do, what we shall do, and what is happening after we do our duties. Not about just obstacles and barriers and stops. It is a very game-changer concept, and I hope that in tandem with raising awareness about having a better world with more equality and equity, we can also have a more accessible world in the future. I hope you all have a good day all around the world, wherever and whenever you watch these videos. And also, I wish you can have a day-to-day learning journey about accessibility, equality, and equity, as all of us we have in our lives. And then we can respect each other in a more real meaning. Wish you a good day, and I'm really happy that we have December 3rd as an International Day to raise the awareness about persons who are living or affected by disability.